Evolution, everybody's favorite science concept right alongside climate change, is one of the central ideas that ties together all of biological science. Biology is the study of life, and evolution gives us our understanding of the workings of that life, where life is coming from, where life is going, and how life changes over time. It's one of those science courses where people take in all of the content and then go, nah bro, that shit ain't real. And this is because it conflicts with religion. So it is time to have this discussion. And it's actually a very important discussion to have, because what we are finding is that in high schools across the United States of America, teaching evolution has not been going over so well. Going all the way back to the original blow-up point of this controversy, the 1925 Scopes monkey trial in Dayton, Tennessee, the middle of the Bible Belt. Substitute teacher John T. Scopes was charged with violating a state law that prohibited the teaching of human evolution in state-funded schools. Mr. Scopes was found guilty of this charge and fined $100, which equates to roughly $1,400 by today's standards. But fast forward, and his conviction ultimately was overturned, and then fast forward a little bit more, and the law that he violated was actually struck down for being religious in nature. And then people tried to push creationism in school and push it as if it was an actual science, teaching the idea that God created the universe and all of the life that we have. That ultimately was struck down by the Supreme Court. Fast forward years after that, and creationism sort of got a repackaging and a redesign to be resold to the public again in the form of intelligent design. Now, intelligent design operated on this idea of something called irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity is basically the idea that things that we encounter in our universe that are living are so complex that there is simply no way that they could have formed through natural processes like evolution. Instead, irreducible complexity would suggest that these things must have been designed by some form of intelligent creator, some sentient being that had an intelligence and articulately designed these things to exist. To introduce the idea of irreducible complexity, intelligent design proponents point to things that are man-made. So, for example, Mount Rushmore, the very famous rock formation, is pointed to as being irreducibly complex. Meaning, their argument is that you can look at the structural integrity and detail in Mount Rushmore and conclude that there is no way that that rock formation occurred naturally by natural processes. It must have been designed. And we know that Mount Rushmore was designed. It was designed by humans. The key difference between intelligent design and creationism is that intelligent design was more subtle in their designer. Where creationism gave you the answer, that God was the creator of everything, intelligent design does not explicitly state any God as the creator. Rather, it just states that there simply must be some intelligent being that is behind this life, with God being the implication. And intelligent design tried to utilize this irreducible complexity argument to justify itself as a legitimate science that should be taught in classrooms, rather than being packaged as a religion. But this was challenged essentially as creationism in disguise in the 2005 case Kitzmiller versus the Dover Area School District. Evolutionary biologists argue that living things are reducibly complex. In other words, the complexity of the living things that we have today evolved with change over time from things that were simpler in the past. One popular example that was actually brought up in the Dover school trial was the idea of the flagella of bacteria cells. Now, flagella, or those little spinny tail thingies that you guys are actually probably most familiar with from sperm, can utilize a molecular motor that in some cases contains upwards of 40 different protein parts that are all interacting in this essentially machine inside of the organism that results in the rotation of the tail that will propel the organism through its aqueous environment. So intelligent designers look at this motor and they say this structure is a single system composed of all of these different protein parts that are interworking so specifically and so precisely that there's no way this would have evolved slowly over time through nature, because if you remove any one of those parts, the machine falls apart. It's virtually useless for the organism to have any of the parts of the machine because it doesn't become useful until the whole machine is put together. But then evolutionary biologists can fire back with evidence of the reducible complexity that intelligent designers say is absent. Scientists in laboratories have conducted experiments where they have deleted the genes for some of the proteins of this molecular motor or mutated them, which resulted in a change of the protein parts of the molecular motor. And what they found was that you can alter this machine and the flagellum still works. Sometimes with reduced efficiency, but it'll still move the critter along. So they found that this wasn't as precise of a system as one might believe it to be. And further looking into the reducible complexity of these bacterial flagella, by looking at the basal body, the motor part of the flagella, scientists found that it actually looks very, very similar to the type 3 secretion system of Salmonella. This is a needle-like body that has a similar basal body structure and an appendage that comes out from the organism, but this one does not rotate. There is no rotating motor involved. So instead of rotating, this needle is actually used to inject toxins into other cells. And that gives this structure a use. And this structure is composed of parts of the flagella, but not all of the parts of the flagella. And so this showcases gradual change over time in which a machine without some of its parts can still serve a purpose, even if it is a purpose that is different in nature. And now we fast forward to today's time, where organizations like the Discovery Institute have pushed for legislation that would push teaching the controversy in classrooms. So, we've stacked up creationism, knocked it down. We've stacked up intelligent design, knocked it down. So what is this teaching the controversy idea? Well, basically the idea of teaching the controversy would suggest that teachers in an evolutionary biology classroom should be teaching their students the evidence for evolution, and then also teaching students the proposed weaknesses of evolution, and then encouraging their students to come to their own conclusions. And on the surface, the general public may say, well, why is that such a bad thing? And the reason is because the theory of evolution is not a controversy. At least it's not a scientific one. The theory of evolution is what we would refer to as a social controversy. Because the science of evolution conflicts with people's religious values, religious beliefs, their faith-based knowledge of the world, some people reject the scientific consensus in favor of their own faith. But that does not mean that there is disagreement in the science community. Yet this idea of teaching the controversy is perpetuated in school classrooms, even by high school teachers themselves, who sometimes feel weak on the content of evolution as being just a theory, which comes from what is perhaps the biggest misconception in science, which is the idea of confusing a theory with a hypothesis. For whatever reason, a lot of the general public has seemed to confuse the idea that you start with a hypothesis. When your hypothesis is supported, it gets upgraded to a theory, and when your theory is proven, then that gets upgraded to a law, as if there is a hierarchy and laws come at the top. In fact, if there were a hierarchy, a theory would probably actually carry more weight than a law would. You see, scientific laws are basically just descriptions of observed phenomena, and they're generally summarized by mathematical equations. In the 17th century, Isaac Newton discovered the law of gravity, which was a mathematical expression that you could use to discover the interaction between two bodies. You can use Newton's law to calculate observations. The force of an object is equal to its mass times its acceleration. But Isaac Newton's law of gravity does absolutely nothing to explain what gravity really is, or how gravity really works. It's literally just a statement, a calculation you can put in that says you can observe it happen. It was Einstein's theory of relativity that actually offered an in-depth explanation of what gravity is and how it works. It's critically important to teach students that may grow up to be the next generation of scientists what science is and what science is not. Teaching the controversy of evolution because people have certain religious views is inherently doing a disservice to the science community. Evolution is defined as the change in frequency of inheritable traits in a population, or the allele frequency in a population. Allele is a fancy science word for alternate versions of a gene. Genes contain the information that make our traits, and genes can be passed down to your offspring. So if you survive and you reproduce, you pass on your genes and thereby your traits. Having a thorough understanding of evolution ties together how living organisms work and operate in our natural world. We need to have an understanding of that information to operate in this world. The last video I made was on the antibiotic resistance crisis. Bacteria, living organisms, are evolving resistance to our antibiotics. I also mentioned the company Locus Biosciences, which is utilizing information of evolutionary biology to create CRISPR-phage, a modified form of phage therapy, where viruses are supercharged with CRISPR-Cas systems that are designed to destroy bacteria as efficiently as possible. And it's really important that students have a clear understanding that religion and science exist in separate realms. Science, by definition, is the way that we as humans seek to understand the natural world. And science relies on the assumption that natural processes are sufficient to explain the natural world. In other words, science cannot contain supernatural forces. The entity of God is not scientific. It is not science. Which also is not the same thing as saying that God is not real, or science disproves God. Nobody is saying that science will disprove religion because science doesn't deal with religion. Religion is not based in hypotheses that are testable and falsifiable. Religion is based in faith. The whole point of religion is to believe in something through your own faith in the absence of evidence. Science is not faith-based. Scientists do not believe in evolution. They don't have faith in evolution. Scientists observe all of the available evidence that we have at our disposal, and all of that evidence supports the notion that existing life today has evolved from simpler life in the past, and that evolution is still something that is happening today and ongoing. So, utilizing this teaching the controversy strategy to educate students on what is science and what is not science can be very useful. Teaching the controversy to undermine the theory of evolution should not be utilized in our classrooms. Thank you for watching, and stay inquisitive.